Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for being here tonight and joining us on Zoom for our December 1st Monday lecture with Valerie Brown and John Baird, Clearness Committees, an Introduction to Spiritual Discernment for Personal and Social Transformation. It's such a joy to see you all on Zoom, and welcome to our alumni, some staff members, our leader community, our morning worship community, and to all of those joining us for the first time as well. If this is your first time at a Pendle Hill event, Pendle Hill is an experiment in spiritual learning community since 1930. And one of our experiments is our First Monday lecture series on the first Monday of every month, inviting folks from near and far to join us in learning with and from a variety of speakers and leaders. And so we're really excited tonight to welcome Valerie and John. I'm Anna Hill. I use she, her pronouns. I serve as the Education Engagement Coordinator at Pendle Hill and the producer of our podcast, The Seed Conversations for Radical Hope. I'm joining you tonight from the land of the Lenni Lenape in what is now known as Philadelphia. Before I say a little bit more about Valerie and John, I'm going to give us a quick tech run through, and then we will take a moment of silence together before learning from them this evening. On tech support tonight, I'm joined by Kat, our Quaker Voluntary Service Fellow this year, serving at Pendle Hill, and Anne Jerome, our current friend in residence. If you have any tech difficulties throughout the evening, please message Anne or Kat, and they will do their best to support you. You can send them a direct chat message. We are live streaming this video to YouTube, and it will be available to watch on our YouTube channel, Pendle Hill USA. I'll send out a follow-up email tomorrow or Wednesday with the link to view the recording. Only leader faces and speaker faces will be live streamed and recorded. Live transcription is enabled, so you should be able to turn on closed captioning there at the bottom of your screen. And during the Q&A at the end, the chat will be open, and throughout the chat will be open for questions. At the end, for our question and answer session, I will read the questions out loud from the chat and synthesize similar ones and collect those threads to read to Valerie and John. And after the Q&A, we'll conclude the night with a final moment of silent worship together. If you have any other questions, please feel free to message Anne and Kat. And with all of that, I'm so excited to welcome Valerie and John tonight. Valerie Brown is an author, an ordained Buddhist Quaker Dharma teacher in the lineage of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh and the Plum Village tradition, a courage and renewal facilitator, and an executive coach specializing in leadership development and mindfulness practices with a focus on diversity, social equity, and inclusion. A former lawyer and lobbyist, Valerie transformed her high-pressure 20-year career into serving leaders and nonprofits to create trustworthy, authentic, compassionate, and connected workspaces. John Baird has served as clerk of 2 Friends meetings, head of 2 Friends schools, a board member at Pendle Hill and the Friends Council on Education, a religion and biology teacher, a friend in residence at Pendle Hill and Woodbrook Study Center. He has been prepared as a facilitator by the Center for Courage and Renewal and has led retreats and workshops for schools, meetings, conference centers, and churches. I invite us all to settle again into some silent and contemplative worship. And Valerie and John, please speak as you're led out of the silence.
Hello, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here with you at this Monday night lecture and to particularly share this evening with my dear friend, John Baird. I also want to thank Anna, Kat, and Anne for their amazing support. This would not be happening without their efforts, so I really want to acknowledge them. And I want to acknowledge all of you for being here. Again, we would not be having this time together without you. It's a delight and a pleasure to see and welcome old friends and new friends. So, uh, so thank you. Thank you for being here. John.
Thank you, Val. I too am absolutely delighted to be here. And while I wish that we could all be sitting together in the barn at Pendle Hill, it's so wonderful that we can have friends from all over the world together for this conversation. And I'm extremely excited. I am a convinced friend and a member of Durham Friends Meeting in Durham, North Carolina, the home of the Okanichi Band of the Saponi Nation. And I am grateful for their stewardship and their continuing presence here in Central North Carolina. I want to thank my many mentors and teachers and colleagues who've taught me so much about clearness committees, the meetings I belong to. Parker Palmer, who I first met in a summer institute at Pendle Hill back in the 1980s. And as I'm sure many of you know, Parker's writings and teaching and the organization that he helped to found, the Center for Courage and Renewal, has wonderful resources and is a source of inspiration and knowledge and wisdom on the subjects we'll be talking about tonight. And it was at a Courage and Renewal retreat at Pendle Hill that I first met Valerie and attended a retreat with her and Carol Korch. And that's how I was introduced to the Center for Courage and Renewal and really deepened my understanding of what a clearness committee can be. And thanks to Pendle Hill for this opportunity and for all that you do to help us and all of us who are here to know our gifts and bring them into the world. Tonight, we want to engage you as active participants. I'm glad Anna said learning with and from you. We will be learning about clearness committees and discernment, reflecting on the kinds of questions one might bring to a clearness committee, and considering the ways the clearness process can be valuable to you and your community. We welcome those of you who have extensive experience with clearness committees and those of you for whom clearness committees are completely new. We will have time for questions and answers, and we look forward to sharing experiences with you and learning from each other. There are many good resources on this subject, and we will share some of those with you at the end of the program. If this brief session speaks to you, perhaps you will be inspired to take part in a retreat in March that Valerie and I will be leading at Pendle Hill, where we will have an opportunity to go much deeper into these topics, and which everyone who attends who wishes to will be able to be a focused person for a clearness committee. And I also suggest you consider the spring term at Pendle Hill from March to May of 2024 as an opportunity to explore your spiritual gifts and leadings more deeply in community. So thank you.
Thanks, John. So there are many starting points at which to examine this process of spiritual discernment, this process of the Clearness Committee. And John mentioned Parker, the name of Parker Palmer. And I can't help but really feel such great appreciation, tenderness, and gratitude for Parker, who spent many years at Pendle Hill and who continues to enrich so many people's lives with his teaching, his writing, and certainly his work on the Clearness Committee has deeply touched me. But I think a place to begin to look at the Clearness Committee is through our own intention. What is it that brought us here tonight? So intention uh, can sound like a very fancy word. But when I think about it, at least for me personally, intention kind of directs or catalyzes action. It's not a goal or a plan that can be 100% uh, executed with precision, but instead can feel very open-ended. It can even feel fluid or slippery. And that's okay, because it's really the effort to name an intention that is so, so powerful that really catalyzes our action. So I'd invite us to think about, what is it that brought you here tonight? What intention are you holding for this 1 hour session, this 1.5 hour session that we have tonight? So I want to give you just 1 minute of think time to jot a note about what brought you here. What intention are you holding? Let that percolate. I'll keep an eye on the clock. And then after you've had a chance to write something down, you're invited to place that in chat or come off mute and speak out your intention. Okay, so that's about a minute. And I see people are already beginning to place in the chat some thoughts about intention. To hear your thoughts when the Clearness Committee is or isn't appropriate, to determine if am ready for a Clearness Committee. My intention for tonight is to become more skilled in the questioning process during the Clearness Committee, to learn what a Clearness Committee is, to deepen into the mystery at the heart of the Clearness process, to learn what a Clearness Committee is, to understand the process and create a better process for clarity and accountability. Does anyone wish to come off mute and speak out about what brought you here? Either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand. Oh, is that O, my friend O? Yes. Dear one, welcome. You are on mute.
Yes, I'm always open to receiving tools to deepen my capacity to be faithful to God's love and to be an ambassador of God's love.
So beautifully said. Yes, thank you.
Thank you all.
Anyone else?
Yes, I experienced a Clearness Committee about 10 years ago, which was so profound. And I really want to learn to be able to effectively listen and be trained in this eventually.
Thank you so much, Elise. I really love that. Yes. And I'd invite folks to really read through some of these beautiful comments and queries, questions that are in the chat. For example, Lauren says to be better at ministering to friends, either receiving ministry or giving ministry, working on skills for clearness committees. So anything else you want to say about what brought you here? And Margaret, to learn more about current understandings of Clearness Committee as we understand more of the richness of our history. So thank you for all of that. And I think what Margaret is pointing to, I really want to underscore, as well as what O and everyone has shared, the kind of mystery that is inherent and that's underlying much of this. And John, do you want to jump in and kind of talk about some of that?
Sure. Thank you, Val. Clearness committees are one of the great gifts of Quakerism, and they are most often used for membership to a meeting and for marriage clearness. However, they are applicable to many other life situations. And in response to Val's question about what brought me here, literally here with you tonight, was a decision that I made many years ago before I knew anything about either Quakerism or clearness committees. I was deeply distressed by the Vietnam War. I was draft age and was conflicted within myself and with my beloved parents. I was confused about what to do. I was convinced that participation in war, that killing is wrong, and I didn't want to go against my parents' strong views. I knew I had to do what was right for me. It took me a long, arduous process to get there. I listened to other people, read books, took long walks, and pondered and prayed and hiked up mountains. Then I had a horrifying dream in which I killed a child in a war. I was at a crossroads. I finally did what I knew I had to do, register as a conscientious objector. The struggle was a catalyst for me to begin a journey which led me to be with you tonight. I was introduced to Quakers through the peace testimony, and I began to journey on a path without which I wouldn't be here now. My first experience with a clearness committee was a committee for membership at Old Chatham Friends meeting, where friends took me in and listened to my questions, invited me to share my experience, and helped me to learn to listen to the light. I then had a marriage clearness committee with my wife, Aminda, in the same meeting, and one of the members of that committee still writes us on our wedding anniversary every year after 44 years. What I've learned through some of these experiences is when I went through my discernment about the draft, I thought I had to do it alone. I wanted to please other people and behave in the ways that I thought they wanted me to act. Thomas Kelly wrote, "Each of us tends to be not a single self, but a whole committee of selves. We are not integrated. We are distraught. We feel honestly the pull of many obligations and try to fulfill them all." That was me. I needed to begin to learn to listen for a sense of inner guidance. And that decision was a catalyst for me to begin to do that. Sometimes, Parker Palmer writes, the journey toward inner truth is too taxing to be made solo, too hidden to be traveled without company, or the destination is too daunting to be achieved alone. We need community to find the courage to venture into the lands to which the inner teacher may call us. So for me, the need to make a decision about becoming a conscientious objector became a catalyst for a lifelong journey, led me to friends whose practices and processes helped me to listen to my own inner voice. For me, this means trying to pay attention to inward nudges, sometimes a sense of yearning or disquiet. Sometimes I've had the experience of clearly standing in the light. For me, it's both a process of inward listening and being in community. I need community in order to reach clearness, and clearness committees offer a way for a community to support people at critical moments of their lives. So to me, discernment is about learning to trust the light. Anna, can you, or Kat, can you put that? There's a picture that I'd like to share as an image of a clearness committee or a community holding an individual in a way that helps them to reach clearness. We need each other. Val?
Thank you, John. And Kat or Anna, you could take that image down. Let's go back to gallery view. Thank you. That's a lovely image. It's so evocative of the Clearness Committee. So when I think about the Clearness Committee, when I feel into the Clearness Committee, two words keep coming up for me and seem to be at the heart of the movement of the Clearness Committee. Those two words are spiritual discernment. Spiritual discernment, right? Which is at the title of this program. They feel like big words, but I'm curious, before I give my 2 cents about what those words mean to me and share with you some of the thinking of some friends about those two words. I'd love to hear your thoughts about what is spiritual discernment. Why is this important to the Clearness Committee process? So, what is spiritual discernment? Why is this important? What does this have to do with the Clearness Committee? And again, feel free to put something in chat. And Kat, thank you for putting those queries or questions in the chat. But feel free to come off mute and let's have a conversation. Love to hear your thoughts. Pam. Great to see you. And Pamela has been part of we've shared many clearness committees together. So in full disclosure, but yes, as a person, we've shared clearness committees together. Love to hear your experience of spiritual discernment.
To me, it's fascinating because I know the word discernment, and I use that word for being able to detect or understand, but spiritual discernment has come to mean something very different to me, because it's often very much flying in the face or 180-degree or way different from what I had logically figured out would be the next step or the right thing, or it comes from a completely different place. So I'm just very appreciative of the fact that discernment seems like one thing, and then spiritual discernment can just be wide open and in many different areas.
Thank you, Pam. So I see Kathy's placed in the chat, opening an open heart and body. And Olivia, for me, spiritual discernment is coming to a decision guided by spirit. Robert says, going beyond thinking or reacting, connecting with that of the spirit and light for help in going deeper, to seek help in one's questions or inner conflict. Oh, says, to receive tools to deepen my faithfulness. Anything else you want to say about this practice of spiritual discernment? Yes, Arthur. Great to see you.
Thank you, Valerie. Simply understood, I think of spiritual as larger energy.
Oh,
And so spiritual discernment is bringing larger energy, the energy of the divine, the energy of community, bringing the larger energy, gathering the larger energy in support of what decision needs to be made.
beautifully said.
Mm.
Yes. And O adds, we are created out of spiritual discernment.
Mm.
I love all of this that's been shared. So I would add, right alongside of what you have said, I am not checking in as an expert, but as someone who is also on a learning journey right alongside with you. So here's what Patricia Loring has said in writing about spiritual discernment. And I remember her being at Pendle Hill, maybe it was for the 80th anniversary of Pendle Hill, which is more than 10 years ago, my goodness. And she described spiritual discernment as a gift from God, not a matter of personal achievement, not the result of analysis or training. Its origins, Loring says, are gratuitous and mysterious. It is through this practice of spiritual discernment, as Arthur is pointing toward, that helps us build this relationship with God and in community, rather than a matter of self-fulfillment. And Nadine Claire Hoover, she describes discernment as a human ability. I often like to call it a faculty of heart and mind and body and spirit that helps us to comprehend this inner nature and the relationship among all things that can sometimes feel and seem very obscure. The world is not just complicated, it's complex. And spiritual discernment can support us in this weaving our way to greater insight and judgment. And so this is not based on kind of blind faith, but on a testing of discernment through our faith and through our practice. And many practices like what we're doing, what we've done right here, silence and community and spiritual companioning, spiritual friendships, anamkara, as the great John O'Donoghue, the Irish poet, would say, meeting for worship and silence and stillness and solitude. So all of that can help us transform our lives. And I think it's really important to begin to identify the practices that can really help us to listen to this sense of the spirit that is always present. And so I've named some things, but I'm wondering what practices you have found useful in your daily life that support your opening to this gift from God that is always present. So again, please feel free to put that in chat or raise your hand, and virtual or otherwise, come off mute. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Yes, Robert.
The first thing that comes to my mind is in reflecting on the experience. I've been to one Clearness committee, but I've done quite a bit of work with Parker Palmer's work. Is finding a way to center down, and in that process, clean the windows of perception that kind of hover over me. Those windows to the transcendent, which I often view as not necessarily religious, but can be described that way. But it's an opening to what's larger and bigger and more important, including in ourselves. So I even had, just this morning, I had a time to chat to somebody, and I said, it's like taking ammonia out and washing the windows so they really get clean. The windows of my perception and openness. I did suggest that they used the non-smelly kind of ammonia in doing that. That's my first thought.
Robert, thank you so much for that. That's I get this visual image of you cleaning windows, and it's very evocative. Lovely. And I'm loving all of the practices that folks are listing in the chat. Yeah, daily worship time and physical effortful hiking, Melissa says. So Mayberry.
Centering prayer, daily walks.
Paying attention. Peer counseling. And yes, Mayberry, I know you had a hand raised. Please.
I guess I wanted to share, I was thinking just the way, like in my experience, spiritual discernment always feels to me very like interconnected with like the creative encounter, kind of, right? The idea of using art, movement, music, poetry to kind of experience how the spirit comes to us within and around.
I love that. Yeah, thank you. So there are many, many paths. There are many, many doors to access this. And what I'm pointing to is the availability of this is it feels like we're surrounded by this. And can we turn and open to this, to the guidance that is always there, and the practices that Mayberry that you've talked about and that folks have listed in the chat and Robert has talked about, all of these are really, really helpful. So I also want to say, a little bit, John shared so beautifully about his personal experience. And I would simply say that, yes, when I was at a huge crossroads in my life, very much ensconced in my big lawyer job as a lawyer and a lobbyist, and also trying to study clearness committees and so forth with Parker and trying to figure all of this out. Like, I'm a lawyer. What am I doing in these spaces? I sat next to Parker in clearness committees and sat next to other people. And it was one of the most profound experiences of my life to be able to hear other people speak the voice of their own soul emerge. It's the kind of experience that when you hear it, you know that it's real. And to hear my own voice, the voice of my own soul. And by soul, there are many names, true self, inner teacher, big self, inner wisdom. There are many names for the word soul, but we often say it is the beingness of human beings. So to hear this voice speak was revelatory for me, and really, like the story that John shared, set me on a different course and a different path. I will say too, there've been some questions in the chat about the use of the Clearness Committee, whether it's used traditionally for marriage or membership. But actually, the Clearness Committee has been used in many, many situations. A friend put in the chat, well, can it be used among Jewish communities? And the answer to that is absolutely, positively, yes. In fact, just a couple of months ago, I got a call from the Harvard Business School, of all places, that wanted to offer Clearness Committee to their leaders who were studying business in business school. Why? Because they wanted leaders to have a sense of spiritual grounding, a moral compass, and not just understand the bottom line. And so I think it's also important for people who are leaders in leadership position. They often have a sense of isolation. And so the Clearness Committee can cut through that because it offers this a place of community. Mm-hmm. John, do you want to add something more there?
Just that I agree with everything you just said. I feel there's so much to say and so little time. Are we ready to go into some of the guidelines around how to hold a Clearness Committee? You ready to move on to that?
Yeah, let's do that, and we can circle back to some of the key elements. But I think when we talk about the guidelines, we'll talk about some key elements. But yeah, please take it away.
Okay. Well, when Valerie and I lead a weekend retreat, and we have the Clearness Committees, we often start with a song. So I'm going to start this with one of the songs we sometimes use. We have no time but this present time. We have no time but this present time. We have no time but this present time. Therefore prize your time for your soul's sake. Those words are taken from a letter that George Fox wrote to his parents, and they were put to music by Paulette Meyer. Well, I'm going to share some guidelines for clearness committees. I think one of the most important things to say is that clearness committees are not for advice giving or problem fixing. The Center for Courage Renewal has a touchstone, which I'd like to read to you. These were developed by Parker and the center. No fixing, saving, advising, or correcting. This is one of the hardest guidelines for those of us who like to help, but it is vital to welcoming the soul, to making space for the inner teacher. Clearness Committee is not a time for counseling or talking about the experiences that I've had that I think might be helpful to the focused person. It's a time for focusing on the person who brings the question, who we refer to as the focused person, and remembering that each of us has a teacher within, that source of inner wisdom, no matter what we call it, that's within all of us. And the job of the members of the Clearness Committee is not to solve the problem or issue or concern that the focused person brings, but to hold the person. Everything we do in a Clearness Committee is in the service of creating a safe, reflective space in which the focused person can have a conversation with their own inner teacher to discover the seeds of their own highest understanding. So when we hold a Clearness Committee, when we've done these in the retreats, they generally last 2 hours. The focused person is the person who brings the question, issue, or concern. And it's important that they take some time with their question, to live into it, to engage in some of those practices we talked about earlier that help them to discern what it really is that they want to bring, to allow it to steep. Generally, there are 4 or 5 trusted friends who are committee members in the Clearness Committee. And when the committee meets, it's in a private space where the group will not be interrupted, and a space that is made to feel comfortable for the focused person. A timekeeper is selected, and the meeting begins in silence until the focused person is ready to describe the issue or question at hand. It's helpful for them to give a brief statement of the question, of what they might want from the group, what they see on the horizon, but to keep it brief. Committee members listen in silence without interrupting, and the focused person lets the timekeeper know when they're ready to begin with open and honest questions. This is one of the most important aspects of the process. Open and honest questions are ones that we can't possibly anticipate the answer to. They can be challenging, but they must be caring, gentle questions that go to the person as well as the issue. In asking an open question, it's very helpful to stay with the language that the focused person has used and to listen for metaphors that they may use in their description. Let the questions come from your heart and your intuition, as well as your mind. The best open questions are simple and straightforward. They come from caring for the focused person, not one's curiosity, or not my desire to prove that I can ask the best question. It's really a time for focused attention, holding a loving space around the focused person. I don't know if you want to say any more about that now, Val.
Those are really all beautifully, beautifully stated. I would add that the questions, these open and honest questions, arise from the listening,
Mhm.
from the quality of our attentiveness. And so while listening may seem like a very simple act that we do every day in and day out, this involves many, many skills. And of course, as human beings, we're hardwired for connection with others. But the kind of listening that we're pointing to involves cognitive skills. For example, the capacity for perspective taking, to be able to take the perspective of another without judgment, or at least being aware of the judgment that one is holding about another person. Um, this involves emotional skills, which is a capacity for empathetic attunement, to be able to stay with for 2 hours or an hour or whatever the length of time is, open, agendaless. I don't have an agenda to fix the situation. Um, and there's a listening for agreement as opposed to where I disagree. So often, for myself, certainly trained as a lawyer, I was trained to listen for the holes in another person's speech or argument, which is the opposite of what we're talking about here. It's actually listening with a quality of attunement and sensitivity. And all of this it's on a physical level, it's on a spiritual level, it's on an energetic level. Yes, and Pamela, it is an experiment with the light. And so this involves many, many skills. And the skills are developed through all of the practices that you've previously named and described. John, anything else?
Thank you, Val. It's very helpful. Another element of the Clearness Committee that's very important is the pacing. Speaking of lawyers, it should not feel like a cross-examination, but rather a relaxed, gentle, spacious pacing that's guided by the focused person. So as a committee member, it's important to be really tuned in to that person and allow the questions to sink into the silence. It's very valuable to have there be questions coming from different people. The focused person always has the total freedom not to answer a question, or to ask it to be reframed or to return to it later. Silent time does not mean that nothing is happening. In fact, we talk about treating silence as a member of the group, and sometimes we'll put an empty chair in the circle for silence. It's important to trust and treasure the silent time. This may be when the most important thing is happening. New insights emerging from deep within. After the time of open, honest questions, the timekeeper asks whether the focused person would like to continue with questions or to reserve the rest of their time for something we call mirroring. Mirroring can be extremely valuable. It is reflecting back to the focused person exactly what you've heard and what you've observed by direct quotes, by repeating back what you've heard, sometimes by reflecting the body language that you saw in the focused person. It's tricky because it's not a time for interpreting the feelings that the person had when they were speaking, but rather to tell them what you heard and saw. And by the way, it's important for us as committee members to be conscious of our own body language so that we're not trying to guide the focused person by the way we're responding. Mirroring can be extremely valuable to the focused person because sometimes we don't even know what we've said. As we get to the end of the Clearness Committee, we give affirmations of the soul at work. We let the focused person know the gifts that we've seen, the gratitude that we feel for the work that they've done and for the qualities and strengths that we've witnessed. Sometimes the focused person has no idea how much time has gone by. Sometimes it's valuable to take notes to remind you of what's said, but when we do that in our courage retreats, we always give the notes to the focused person at the end. And that leads to a final guideline, which is the importance of confidentiality. In fact, we use the term double confidentiality, which means there is absolutely confidentiality both within and outside the group. Nothing that was said during the Clearness Committee will be repeated outside of the group. But also, committee members will not approach the focused person to return to the issue that they shared. If the focused person wishes to initiate a conversation, they may, but the Clearness Committee members would not go back to the focused person. That's what double confidentiality means. Discernment is an unfolding process which continues after the meeting is over. A good committee will continue long after the meeting ends, allowing for the discernment to season fully. Val?
Thank you so much, John. And let me also say that perhaps some of the most powerful clearness committees that I've experienced, and one that I had just maybe a week or so ago, was exclusively for people who identify as Black, Indigenous, and as a person of color. And so we had rounds of clearness committees exclusively for those folks. It was a retreat for people who identify in that way. And I have to say that there again, the sense of safety, the sense of vulnerability, the capacity for attunement and connection, allowing one's soul to really come forward, speak, was palpable. So there you have it, our sense of the Clearness Committee, particularly as developed by Parker Palmer and the Center for Courage and Renewal. John, I think we wanted to share some resources before we turned back to questions.
Yes, and I'd like to also share a quote from Henry Nouwen, who was at one time a teacher at Pendle Hill. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their own words more seriously, and discovering their own true selves. Two of the resources that we would recommend are Pendle Hill pamphlets, one by Patricia Loring entitled Spiritual Discernment, which Valerie mentioned. She mentioned Patricia earlier. And Val has written an excellent pamphlet also entitled Coming to Light. It's a Pendle Hill pamphlet. And many of Parker's readings refer to clearness committees, but we would recommend A Hidden Wholeness as one that is especially valuable and specific about clearness committees. Well, we're eager to hear from you. Go ahead, Val.
Yeah, I was going to say, thanks, Kat, for placing those resources in the chat.
A question that I have is to ask you, in your experience, what makes or has made a clearness committee work really well? And we'd love to hear from you about that. And we also want to open this up for questions that you have. If anybody wants to raise their hand. Oh, there we go, Robert.
Thank
And
you.
just before we go ahead, Robert.
This may not fit into where we are in this overview, so feel free to say this is for a more detailed question, because I'm already signed up to go to your retreat, so we can talk about it later. What happens? It's really in some ways a technique. What happens when one person that is on the committee asks some inappropriate questions or question? In other words, some question that is too kind of invasive of the emotional state of the focus person, or otherwise doesn't really follow the guidelines. Is there kind of a great facilitator that kind of helps with that situation, or what?
Well, I'll speak and then hear what Val has to say. I would say first that the focus person can say they don't want to answer that question, or write it down and I'll look at it later. And that a member of the committee can ask for silence, or can check in with the focus person. How did that land? So if there's a sense, we don't always know how it lands with the focus person, but certainly the committee members are collaborating as a group. And if there's a sense that a question wasn't appropriate or is making the focus person uncomfortable, a committee member can speak to that. Val?
Yes, and I appreciate the question, Robert. And it's tricky because one subjective opinion that a question is inappropriate, it could be that for that person, but it may be absolutely the most appropriate question for the focus person. And so really the question is not how the question lands on the member of the committee, but how does that land with the focus person?
Mhm.
And the focus person is really the arbiter of that, not me as a member of the committee. So what does that then call on me as a member of the committee? It calls on me to engage in reflection and some self-control, and settling myself, grounding myself, because it's not about me. It's about the focus person, and really not to lose sight of that. So I think that this can be a very, very tricky, a very tricky question when a committee member starts interjecting. I don't think this is a good question for the focus person. That's not for me to determine. If there's a sense that there's high alert, I mean, we need to be kind of on a level of awareness of what we're saying and what we're doing, our body language, as John pointed to. But we're not there to police the situation. So I hope that's helpful. And I know Jenny has a hand raised.
Yeah. So I was a focus person once a long time ago on a question that was relating to a job. And I truly didn't have any idea what the outcome was going to be. And the committee was so wonderful at really kind of holding me in the space. And I really had an aha moment. And it wasn't an easy thing. It wasn't like, oh, yay. It was like, oh, I'm really clear, even though this is really, really hard. But what and so I've experienced that within a 2-hour clearness committee window, epiphanies happen. But I also know that sometimes, and I've seen this both as being a focus person and also serving on committees, that it's much more equivocal. Like at the end, it's not really clear about the way forward. And so what we had, I mean, I know when I served on a committee, we offer the focus person the opportunity to meet again, after, not immediately, not like the next day, but time for some, reflection and kind of the ability to process, what really was going on, and to meet again. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But I don't know if you could speak to that issue when it feels like people, because I think sometimes people come in like, I'm going to have a clearness committee, and after this, I'm going to be really clear. And they're not always. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Jenny, thank you for the question. It's a wonderful question. And Arthur, we see your hand raised. Yeah. And also we see the questions in the chat from Stan and Will and Peter. So briefly, Jenny, we live in a society where the answer-rich society, where we want a straight answer, and I can understand that the desire for that. The process of the Clearness Committee is really about community and about listening to one's innermost voice of wisdom. And sometimes that innermost voice of wisdom is maybe in turmoil. And perhaps the clarity is, I'm in turmoil. I don't have an answer. And that is the answer. Rather than wanting go left or go right, take the job in Chicago or stay home. And what the Clearness Committee is really about is much deeper than should I take the job in Chicago or not. It's really about looking at patterns over time and how one approaches one's life. Are there patterns? Not necessarily one answer or another. We often say it's the questions and the listening more than the answer that the person is going to receive that is so powerful and so rich, that gives and offers to the focus person and the members of the committee a sense of great relief. So I'd stop there. And I hope that that's useful, because I can so understand, the impulse to want the answer. And that is almost completely at odds with the process of spiritual discernment, which is not about whether I got the answer, because it's grasping yet again at something else. Like there's something outside of oneself that we don't already have, which the very basis for that it points to doubt and a lack of trust. And so part of this is really about what within me can I trust? What can I hear? What can I receive? What is this process? Am I learning? Am I uncovering? Which is is a completely different scenario than I got the answer, I didn't get the answer. John.
No, that's beautifully said. I don't really have anything to add.
I'm wondering if I can lift a couple questions from the chat that I think sort of are in conversation with one another and also connect to a question that I had. But Stan writes, one of you said 4 to 5 persons on the committee. My experience is that 3 or maybe 4 works best. Might you also address the naming of a facilitator of the group to determine when to move to the next phase and or ask if another meeting is necessary? And Kate writes, I was a member of a Clearness committee at which the focus person requested, in addition to our mirroring, our interpretation/insights if we were so led. How much can we diverge from the committee format, using this just for an example, while still calling it a Clearness committee? I think both of those might go to a question, honoring those questions specifically, and also around, I'm wondering for you all, the sacredness around guidelines or rules of the process and when those can be malleable, if that feels right to the focus person, and whether there's sort of different lines there when it becomes not the original thing anymore. But if that's best for the focus person, does it matter what it's named, or how it's being constructed?
I'll take the easy part. The number of committee members is not fixed. I mean, this is a flexible process. I've been in Clearness committees with 2 committee members. I think it's important. It's really not a committee if it's not at least 2. In our retreats, we tend to have 4 or 5. 4 can work very well. 3, of course, can work well. It has most to do with the quality of listening and the ability of the committee members to hold the person and to be there with them in that moment where they are describing their concern, and to ask questions and listen. So the number is not sacred. I think it is helpful to have a facilitator or certainly a timekeeper. We don't want the focus person to be trying to keep track of that. And I think that would also be useful if it's, I mean, I think it would, in my experience, it would be the focus person who might say they'd like to have a second one, and then have the committee consider that. But I do think having a convener to timekeep and address things like that is helpful. The question about, I do think it's flexible and malleable. I'll just be honest, I bristle a little bit about having committee members give interpretations in the meeting. I had a committee, a focus person say, I thought you guys were going to tell me what to do. And of course we said no. So I don't know, Val, maybe you want to speak to
Yeah, I think this has been my experience. Yes, it's not so much the number of people, it's the quality of listening and the quality of holding the space. The number is almost irrelevant. Two people could be a very, very powerful clearness committee. I've been in clearness committee with 7 people. So it really, because you're not working as an individual, the committee becomes gathered, right? That they're gathered. And because they are gathered, they're not separate and dispersed individuals. They're gathered. There is a weaving of the questions. The main point here is that there is no clerk. It's not a clerk role as opposed to a timekeeper. So that's a very subtle and important distinction. That we're all there with the same intention in mind. The interpretation or insights, this is again quite a slippery slope and I would even call it dangerous, quite frankly, because the focus person is very open and often quite vulnerable. I'd even go as far as saying in a kind of altered state, because they're not actually responding to the questions or the queries of the committee. They are in a dialogue with their own soul, and the members of the committee happen to be there. Since the person is in a dialogue with their own soul, they're not really talking to the members of the committee. For someone to offer an opinion, that's just that just seems to be way out there. And if such a thing happened in the middle of the Clearness Committee, it could be quite disruptive to the process. And so this is why before the Clearness Committee, we spend many hours with the members of the committee going over the guidelines of how to be a member of the committee and working with the members of the committee so that we're ready to offer this kind of presence and listening. So I hope that that's useful.
Thank you. I received a question in a message. What types of questions are common or advised for a committee meeting for membership? And maybe, I know you've spoken to asking open and honest questions, but wondering whether committees for things like membership or marriage whether folks are entering those with a common set of questions.
That's a great question. Committee for membership, commonly, in my experience, gives the focus person an opportunity to talk about their spiritual journey and what has led them to friends. I think exploring if there are areas about participation in meeting that they have questions about or concerns about. In my experience, they're often very affirming and encouraging. At the same time, I think it's important that there be space for real exploration, real vulnerability, real opportunity for the person to answer this question. Is this something I'm led to? And of course, the meeting ultimately makes that decision, but this is an opportunity for the focus person to discern for themselves if this feel right and explore what it means with the committee.
Yeah, so questions regarding the person's beliefs, their values, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, their aspirations, the people who have touched their lives, what needs to be forgiven, what needs to be let go of. These are all questions that in the course of kind of our normal daily life, they may not come up so often. But when one is in a dialogue with the deepest part of their beingness, these are the kinds of questions that may come up. And again, it's not one person asking a question, it's a gathered community of people who are in service of, of speaking and listening to the truth of another person's soul. So is it Ori asked the question about who can convene the Clearness Committee and who can serve on one? So Arthur, I know you've had a hand raised, so perhaps we could turn to Arthur and then turn back to, is it Ori's question? Arthur.
Tonight we've had a wonderful session developing shared expectations of the process. And my question is, how important is it to do this kind of preliminary thinking about shared expectations before you enter into a process? Is that something that you're concerned about when you form a new Clearness committee? And what do you say or do to help that happen?
The answer, Arthur, is yes. And so in our retreats, the Clearness Committee is the capstone. We spend perhaps half of the time, more than half the time, preparing people for the process so that friends are seasoned. And by the time they enter the Clearness Committee, they understand that silence, that in the waiting, this is not inactivity. This is dynamic. This is charged space. John.
We practice asking open, honest questions. In fact, we've had one of us will present a concern, and the group will frame questions, and then ask them through the other facilitator just to test what kinds of questions to practice. So we give guidelines and we give some practice, and we also practice telling watershed stories. So we're used to both sharing and listening with a sense of trust and presence.
Right. So in a week-long retreat, we would spend maybe 2 days doing this practice before we go into the Clearness Committee. So people have practiced over and over again. And so Ori asked who can convene a Clearness Committee? Anybody. And I think I gave the example earlier that in Harvard Business School, they wanted to convene a Clearness Committee. Has nothing to do with the Religious Society of Friends, but they wanted to offer this practice to their business leaders to offer them a spiritual foundation for discernment, because many leaders face isolation. And this is a kind of antidote to that isolation, the Clearness Committee. and who can serve on one, anybody. But serve well, that's a different matter. So to serve well on a Clearness committee, I do feel that anyone can do it, but preparation is greatly helpful. John?
Just one other thing about this process, as we do it in the retreats, after some time has elapsed, usually perhaps the next morning in the retreat, we harvest the experience. And without saying anything about the divulging anything that would be confidential, about the process and what we can learn. We're constantly learning, and it's very helpful to be able to talk about what worked and what went well and what was challenging and what we need to work on.
Ask a clarifying or follow-up question. Would that be okay?
Please. And I know, John, you want to share some anonymous quotes from people who had experiences in Clearness Committee. But yes, please, Ori.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And yes, as hopefully is obvious, oriented toward to do the thing well, not simply to do the thing. I guess the heart of my question is really, if someone wanted to do a Clearness committee, would it be appropriate, wise, etc., to sort of do one with the book, or is it really much more appropriate to do it with training, facilitation on a retreat, etc.? Some practices are sort of closed practices, or only appropriate with training, and I'm not sure where this falls on that. And thank you so much for this really beautiful session.
John, do you want to?
Why don't you take this one, Val?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ori. I would say practice, I definitely think doing a retreat, learning the process is of great benefit. But I also think reading the Hidden Wholeness, reading some of the resources that we've cited here, and then practicing it is also a way to go. Again, it's really the quality of the members of the committee and how one prepares for this that really makes the difference. But thank you for the question.
Yes. And I think for the group then to have a conversation before the Clearness Committee about whatever resources they've read, so that they have a shared sense of what the committee, how the committee they wanted to go, would be also really valuable. And again, as Val said, Hidden Wholeness has some very specific guidelines, really helpful guidelines. I do want to share a couple of quotes from retreats that Val and I led. This is during that harvesting session when the next day, people are invited to share their experience. These were memorable for me. One participant said, "Last night, as I came into the Clearness Committee, I was hearing many voices. There were many voices in my head. This morning when I woke up, there was only one, and it was my own." And another participant talked about her experience of the Clearness Committee, or their experience was of a sense of an open door that I could stand in and walk through. So I just like to say thank you to everyone for being here and for your participation. It's been wonderful to be with you. And Val, thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And thank you to everyone. It's the delight to join you here at Pendle Hill.
Thank you so much, Valerie and John. And I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of the questions in the chat. But I'm feeling so much gratitude to have been here and learning with and from you all. As we mentioned at the beginning, Valerie and John will be hosting a workshop this March, I believe March 22nd to 24th, on clearness committees on campus at Pendle Hill in Wallingford, just outside Philadelphia. Kat dropped the link for that in the chat. I'm gonna see if I can join, and it would be great to see you all there as well. And that workshop is offered to everybody, and it's also a part of a larger 10-week residential study program at Pendle Hill called the Spring Term. And Kat is putting the link to that in the chat as well. I'd encourage you all to look through all the materials on that event page. You can also join us for a very informal FAQ drop-in session next Monday too. And feel free to reach out with any questions to admissions@pendlehill.org. And we also hope you join us for next month's First Monday lecture with Zenaida Peterson and Lauren Brownlee of Quaker Coalition for Uprooting Racism, addressing patterns of racial wounding and racial justice in Quaker communities. That's also free and online. You can register to get the Zoom link at that link in the chat as well. And I know folks are dropping off here, but I'd love to just take a few moments of closing worship together before we close with gratitude to everyone here on Zoom. It's such a gift to see all your names and faces, and with so much gratitude, John and Val. Thank you, friends. Have a good night, and I hope to see you on Zoom or on campus again soon.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, Anna and Anne. Thank you, everyone.
Great being here with you all.
All right, good night.